I recently made a video talking about The Cursed Child and how it was one of the worst things I've ever read. I've had some time to recover from the disappointment of first reading it, and a lot of you guys enjoyed that video and wanted me to make a part 2 for the characters I couldn't get to in the first one, namely Hermione, Cedric Diggory, and Dumbledore. If you're watching this without first having watched part 1, that's no problem, but I definitely recommend checking out part 1 as well, as I go through some of the major characters I think were ruined, as well as discussing a bit on the general flaws and issues with the story. But for now, let's get right into the discussion of the 3 other characters. As always, I'll be talking about the issues I have with each character and comparing them to their book versions with quotes to back up my points. Okay, so let's start with Cedric Diggory, as although we don't really see him too much directly in the play, he arguably has the worst mischaracterization in The Cursed Child. For those of you who have had the good fortune to have not read the play, the short summary is that in The Cursed Child, Harry's son Albus decides to travel back in time and stop Cedric from dying in the Goblet of Fire. The way he does this is by sabotaging Cedric during the tournament task, causing him to score terribly and lose the tournament. This embarrassment was apparently so bad that it causes Cedric to become a Death Eater, kill Neville, and set off a chain reaction of events whereby Voldemort wins the Battle of Hogwarts and Harry Potter dies. Snape. Harry Potter won that Triwizard Tournament. Scorpius. He wasn't supposed to do it alone. Cedric was supposed to win it with him, but we humiliated him out of the tournament, and as a result of that humiliation, he became a Death Eater. Snape. Cedric Diggory killed only one wizard, and not a significant one, Neville Longbottom. It's almost impressive how a single line completely ruins and disrespects the character of Cedric Diggory. Just like the characters I spoke about in my previous video, the writers seem to have little to no regard for the writing from the original series and established characters and motivations. I'm not going to act like Cedric was a major character. On the contrary, he has relatively little screen time in the books, but each time he appears or is referenced by other characters, it's always in a positive light, highlighting his key traits of being heroic, selfless, and humble. And this is shown consistently from his first appearance to his last. The very first time Cedric appears in the books is in The Prisoner of Azkaban, where he plays Seeker against Harry. In their match, the Dementors appear and cause Harry to fall off his broom, after which Cedric catches the snitch. And this is his reaction after the loss. No one said anything. The horrible truth sank into Harry like a stone. We didn't lose. Diggory got the snitch, said George, just after you fell. He didn't realize what had happened. When he looked back and saw you on the ground, he tried to call it off. Wanted a rematch, but they won fair and square. Even Wood admits so. I know this might seem minor, but I want to make a point of how Cedric is consistently shown to be a good and fair person, right from his initial introduction. We know how important Quidditch is to the students of Hogwarts, and in the Goblet of Fire, we get a nod to how the House of Hufflepuff rarely gets much glory or recognition. It was plain that the Hufflepuffs felt that Harry had stolen their champion's glory, a feeling exacerbated, perhaps, by the fact that Hufflepuff House very rarely got any glory, and that Cedric was one of the few who had ever given them any, having beaten Gryffindor once at Quidditch. So it's even more meaningful that Cedric was willing to replay the match against Harry. Moving on to the Goblet of Fire, we initially see that Cedric is obviously selected as the Triwizard Champion for Hogwarts, meaning that the Goblet of Fire considers him the most worthy of all the students who entered. We aren't given a clear list of criteria which the Goblet considers, but I would say it's further evidence of Cedric's positive traits. I somehow find it hard to imagine someone like Draco Malfoy being chosen as the champion. And again, throughout this book, we see consistently how Cedric is characterized as a good, honourable person. After the first task, we see that Cedric is grateful to Harry. He wasn't attracting nearly as much unpleasantness in the corridors anymore, which he suspected had a lot to do with Cedric. He had an idea Cedric might have told the Hufflepuffs to leave Harry alone, in gratitude for Harry's tip-off about the dragons. And we also see how his essential good nature mirrors Harry's. I spoke in my previous Cursed Child video how Harry's capacity to love and his willingness to self-sacrifice is both his strength and his fatal flaw, and how Voldemort uses that against him. We see a similar thing here with Cedric, on a smaller scale, with how Barty Crouch Jr. manipulates him into giving information to Harry. Who told Cedric to open it underwater? I did. I trusted that he would pass the information on to you. Decent people are so easy to manipulate, Potter. I was sure Cedric would want to repay you for telling him about the dragons, and so he did. And finally, and most importantly of all, we get the climactic scene where Cedric refuses to take the cup. Cedric was standing feet away from the Triwizard Cup, which was gleaming behind him. "Take it then," Harry panted to Cedric. "Go on, take it. You're there." But Cedric didn't move. He merely stood there, looking at Harry. Then he turned to stare at the cup. Harry saw the longing expression on his face in its golden light. And again, a page later, "You should have got more points on the second task," said Cedric mullishly. "You stayed behind to get all the hostages. I should have done that. I was the only one who was thick enough to take that song seriously," said Harry bitterly. "Just take the cup." "No," said Cedric. He stepped over the spider's tangled legs to join Harry, who stared at him. Cedric was serious. He was walking away from the sort of glory that Hufflepuff House hadn't had in centuries. "Go on," Cedric said. He looked as though this was costing him every ounce of resolution he had, but his face was set. His arms were folded. He seemed decided. It's emphasized twice how much Cedric wants to take the cup, and what it would mean to him and his house. Harry is completely immobilized with an injured leg, and it's only Cedric's own morals and sense of duty that hold him back. And despite Harry urging him to take the cup and seize the glory, he refuses, stepping back totally. Are we really supposed to believe that this Cedric, the boy who was consistently shown to be loyal, dutiful and brave, who was never shown or referred to in a negative light, would become a Death Eater and then murder his fellow student, a boy younger than him? Remember what happened to a boy who was good and kind and brave because he strayed across the path of Lord Voldemort. And even ignoring this awful characterization for just a moment, this is setting aside the complete improbability of Cedric somehow seeking out Voldemort, finding him, convincing him to make him a Death Eater, then killing Neville and apparently only Neville 3 years later. Remember that even Fenrir Greyback was not permitted to become a Death Eater, as they were regarded as Voldemort's closest inner circle. What use would he have for a teenage Hufflepuff boy? What acts of service did Cedric commit to convince Voldemort to allow him to join the Death Eaters? I strongly recommend reading the chapter titled The Third Task in the Goblet of Fire, should you need further convincing. Just like how Voldemort carelessly murdered Cedric and threw him aside without a second thought, the writers of The Cursed Child similarly and callously destroyed his character in the service of their flawed plot. Let's move on now to the next character, Hermione. Hermione really is mischaracterized in two key ways. First, she's not shown to be intelligent or very effective. And second, she is shown to be totally dependent on Ron to achieve success. And if this sounds a bit weird, don't worry, I'm about to get into it. On the first point, I normally show quotes to back up my points, but I feel like in this case it isn't needed, since Hermione's intelligence is pretty much the single most definable trait about her, and there's not even really a single quote I could use to show this. However, in The Cursed Child, this seems to be totally absent. In one scene, we see Hermione call an emergency meeting in her capacity as the Minister for Magic, and she not only seems totally ineffective, but also not respected by her peers. Hermione: Draco, Harry brought this matter to the attention of the Ministry, and I, as Minister for Magic, Draco, a vote you only won because you are his friend. Then, just after this, Draco: Well, I, for one, think this meeting a sham, and I'm leaving. He walks out. Others start to disperse after him. Hermione: No, that's not the way. Come back. We need a strategy. Dare I say that I think even under Cornelius Fudge, I can't think of a scene where he's so utterly disregarded by his fellow wizards that they decide to walk out on him during an emergency meeting. This is compounded by Hermione pleading after them to come back in the closing shot, rather than demonstrating her authority as the minister. This is quite a contrast to the Hermione we know. Look at this scene from the Goblet of Fire, where she stands up to the Ministry. It wasn't her, said Hermione. She looked very nervous, speaking up in front of all these Ministry wizards, yet determined all the same. And another similar scene in the Deathly Hallows, where she stands up to the minister. Are you planning to follow a career in magical law, Miss Granger? Asked Scrimgeour. No, I'm not, retorted Hermione. I'm hoping to do some good in the world. Again, it's almost difficult to pick out individual quotes as it's so deeply core to her character, but the Hermione in the original series is characterized by her determination, her intelligence, and even her stubbornness when pursuing or discussing what she thinks is right. For example, we see this with the Spew Society she sets up to promote elf rights. Then we see various examples of Hermione's intelligence being totally absent throughout the play. Two key moments are the laughably poor defenses she places around the Super Time Turner, which amounts to a sort of video game puzzle that's solved by third-year students, and not realizing when her husband of at least 20 years is being impersonated by a teenager. When Scorpius drinks the Polyjuice potion, Hermione feels like a side character in this play, which I suppose she is, but she feels like a side character due to her being written to be a less capable and overall worse person than she actually is, which is the worst way in which authors sideline established characters in a sequel series, and I feel like nowadays we really see this a lot and I really dislike it. Established characters are brought down to make way for the new characters. Let's move on now to the second point. If you've watched my first video, this is one of the exact same points I made for Ron Weasley, except flipped this time. In an alternate timeline of the story, where Ron and Hermione never married, we see Hermione has devolved into basically Snape. Here are a collection of quotes from the relevant passage. Albus, what are you doing here? Hermione, teaching, for my sins. Albus, but you're not this mean, Hermione. And that's 20 points from Gryffindor to assure Albus Potter that I am this mean. Hermione, just keep quiet, Potter, otherwise you'll lose what limited popularity you already have. Now who can tell me what a Patronus is? No? No one? You really are a most disappointing bunch. Hermione smiles a thin smile. She really is quite mean. As with Ron, this is a grave disservice to Hermione's character. A kind, brave, and loyal friend who has endured much hardship and suffering at Harry's side, and a character who has been called on numerous occasions the brightest witch of her generation. Apparently, all of this is irrelevant, because without her marriage to Ron, she becomes a bitter, horrible Snape stand-in. And not that teaching isn't a great and respectable career, but it's clearly shown her loss of status in no longer being the Minister for Magic, but instead teaching at Hogwarts. I am at a loss trying to figure out how the writers thought, for even 1 second, that it would make sense to portray Hermione in this way. As with Ron, this greatly diminishes and disrespects her character. And without getting sidetracked, this also doesn't reflect well on Harry and Ron, who are meant to be her closest friends, and I'm not sure how they let Hermione get to this point in this alternate timeline. The final character to talk about here is Dumbledore, and to be honest, this won't take long, as he doesn't appear much in the play, and I've also already spoken about his interactions with Harry in my first video, and how it doesn't make sense to see them being at odds with each other again. So, in short, I feel like Dumbledore in this play is shown to be something of an emotional wreck. And also, what he tells Harry in this play directly contradicts what he told him previously as a teenager. Here is the scene where Harry and Dumbledore argue. Dumbledore, if you're referring to Privet Drive, then Harry, years I spent there alone, without knowing what I was or why I was there. Dumbledore, I did not wish to become attached to you. Harry, protecting yourself even then. Dumbledore, no, I was protecting you. I did not want to hurt you. I find this dialogue very confusing. Dumbledore explicitly tells Harry in the original series the reason he had to stay at Privet Drive was to protect him from Voldemort and his followers. And after his explanation at the end of the Order of the Phoenix, Harry never raises this with Dumbledore again, or shows any dissatisfaction or objection to Dumbledore's reasoning, understanding that him staying at Privet Drive likely saved his life. Their exchange goes on in The Cursed Child, with Dumbledore becoming increasingly emotional. Dumbledore attempts to reach out of the portrait, but he can't. He begins to cry, but tries to hide it. Of course I loved you, and I knew that it would happen all over again, that where I loved, I would cause irreparable damage. I am no fit person to love. I have never loved without causing harm. Dumbledore, openly weeping now. I was blind. This is what love does. I couldn't see that you needed to hear that this closed up, tricky, dangerous old man loved you. It's hard to put my finger exactly on it, but this dialogue seems odd and slightly off-key for Dumbledore. It's too emotional for the Dumbledore we knew. And in the original series, we do see instances of Dumbledore showing his care and trust for Harry, without him saying it as directly or as emotionally. Here is a scene from the Order of the Phoenix. "I cared about you too much," said Dumbledore simply. "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth. More for your peace of mind than my plan. More for your life than the lives that might be lost if the plan failed. In other words, I acted exactly as Voldemort expects we fools who love to act." And then, in the Deathly Hallows, we see how Dumbledore greets Harry. "You wonderful boy. You brave, brave man. Let us walk." And the final moment I want to show, which is also my favourite moment, are the mirrored passages from the Half-Blood Prince. "If there is an attack," said Dumbledore, "I give you permission to use any counter-jinx or curse that might occur to you. However, I do not think you need worry about being attacked tonight." "Why not, sir? You are with me," said Dumbledore simply. And then at the end, "It's going to be all right, sir," Harry said over and over again, more worried by Dumbledore's silence than he had by his weakened voice. "We're nearly there. I can apparate us both back. Don't worry." "I am not worried, Harry," said Dumbledore, his voice a little stronger despite the freezing water. "I am with you." Furthermore, Dumbledore is rarely a very emotional character. I actually discussed this in one of my other videos, where I talk about what the Harry Potter movies got wrong about Dumbledore. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but in short, one of the key characterizations of Dumbledore's is that he's always calm, collected, and in control of the situation. He very rarely shows extreme emotion, and the one time we see him openly cry is when he recounts the death of his sister. The argument became a fight. Grindelwald lost control. That which I had always sensed in him, though I pretended not to, now sprang into terrible being. And Ariana, after all my mother's care and caution, lay dead upon the floor. Dumbledore gave a little gasp and began to cry in earnest. The Cursed Child instead portrays Dumbledore as overly emotional, crying and weeping, and the conflict between him and Harry feels manufactured, retreading old ground between the two of them, where it was fully resolved by the end of the original series. And so guys, that wraps up my part 2 discussion of what went wrong with the Cursed Child. To be honest, there are still more things I could talk about, but I think I've now covered the majority of the points I wanted to with this play. Quite a few of you requested I make a part 2, so I hope you enjoyed this video, but I personally hope I never have to revisit the play again because of how awful it is. As always guys, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and want to see more, please do leave a like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel. And also, as always, I'd be interested to hear any thoughts from you guys. I'll always do my best to reply to everybody who comments on my videos. Thank you.